Hi, I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action program, where we talk with New England leaders about the imperative to make disciples, do justice, foster unity, and share Jesus to transform New England. This week, I'm talking with Ed Gaskin. Ed is the Executive Director of Greater Grove Hall Main Streets in Boston. He's a former consultant with Deloitte and IBM. He's worked for the Department of Commerce's Minority Development Agency, helping people start and expand successful businesses. Most of what we're going to talk with Ed about today is the project he's leading in partnership with the Massachusetts Society to Aid Discharged Prisoners and Vision New England and others to help the church understand the need and our role in what is called reentry or prison reentry, and helping people who are exiting prisons and succeed and avoid returning to prison in their future. Ed, thanks for making time for us and thanks for being with us.
Absolutely.
And for folks who don't know Greater Grove Hall Main Streets, we'll talk about prison reentry, but can you give them a little context of what else you do?
So in terms of Greater Grove Hall Main Streets, there's 20 main streets in the city of Boston, for those who are familiar with the Boston area. And they go all the way from East Boston out to West Roxbury. The program was originally funded through the Department of Commerce, and the design was to help small Midwest and Western towns prevent them from becoming ghost towns by revitalizing the main street in those towns. About 20 years ago, the Mayor Menino said, hey, I'd like to see if I can take some of that money and try to revitalize not the city of Boston, but little neighborhoods within the city of Boston. And so it became the first urban Main Street program in the country. And I run one of the 20. I run the one for the Grove Hall district, which has, I don't know, depending on how you count it, plus or minus 40,000 people. And it consists of about 1.8 miles.
Okay. And things are going well.
Well, I'm going to have to say they're going well because otherwise my board would probably want to know what went
well. Thanks. Well, Ed, as you know, but in case our listeners haven't heard a prior episode, we've completed this project looking at what the church needs to become in the post-pandemic world. And we've worked with leaders from across New England doing this. And tons of research on it, but to boil it down, we need to make biblically literate disciples who are becoming more like Jesus, disadvantaging themselves to love and serve others, doing justice, fixing anything in our communities that violate the pre-fall order, in unity across divides like race, gender, ethnicity. Because when we do that, people want to know Jesus. And we've all agreed this isn't a class and it's not a program, it's a culture. But that's the bottom line outcome of the research is the church needs to change direction a little bit. And so with that kind of context, how do you think about reentry as a justice issue, or do you not?
The people who do it think about it in the context of restorative justice. I haven't developed that sophisticated of an answer yet. So one of the issues that you have is you have the punishment part, right? So if the punishment is being separated from society, and maybe there's some kind of restitution, there's some financial fees and payments and things like that, at some point, more likely than not, you will have completed all that. So the punishment part is done, but if you're the returning citizen, you may continue to be punished indefinitely because now you have this criminal record, this Corey record, which might have a stigma or any other kinds of things that go involved. And so you never get the chance to start from a clean slate again. And so from a justice standpoint, it was never meant that your punishment would be for the rest of your life, but we don't really have any sort of interventions to help say, okay, let's support this individual and get them basically the second chance or third chance or whatever it is, the 70 times 7 that they need to have a new life.
And so you're leading this research project into this. And now I know we're a partner with you in it, but there's a bunch of people working together. The Massachusetts Society I already mentioned. Who else is partnering with you in this?
The usual suspects like Park Street and Grace Chapel and Black Mercy Alliance, Boston Collaborative, And I'm sure there's a few more that I'm forgetting. I probably should read those off the thing so I don't get in trouble. But this is, trust me, if they're Christians, they should be forgiving. So if I missed them,
and if you want, send out a check, and you can be a partner in it too. And now more people are working on it.
there we go. There we go.
Now, Ed, tell us a little bit. Is there some data to help us understand the problem? Actually, you said the phrase "returning citizens,"
Right.
and so that's a newer term for some people. Can you tell us why that, and as opposed to, and what it means, just in case it's not clear to someone?
Well, it's really funny because I used the term returning citizens recently in context, and they're like, "What? You mean like convicts, felons?" like what do you like that's what we know. What is this term that you're talking about? So I'm only saying, but it's the same thing, right? So it's basically citizens who are returning back to the community. So returning citizens isn't quite as pejorative as ex-cons or felons or whatever.
Okay. And so now how many ex-cons, returning citizens, whatever, how many are returning into our communities each year, at least in the Boston area?
So we're still talking about a couple thousand, because you're from the various 16 Department of Correction institutions and the Sheriff's Department, etc. So that's roughly, and again, the numbers would go up and down, and there was a lot of people who were released, at pre-pandemic or pandemic, etc. So it'll probably level out again at some point. So
it's in the thousands at least.
Yes.
Today.
Yes.
And so when folks are returning,
yes,
what are you finding are some of the needs then that they have from, I guess, the day they walk out to, I'm guessing it's longer term than that too.
Yeah. So some of the stuff is just very well documented. So if you think of Maslow's hierarchy, right? So you have, shelter, like physical kinds of needs, shelter, food, job, all the way up to higher level needs like a sense of belonging and hope and those kind of things. And so some people, when they leave, they return back to family and friends, and they pick up where they left off. And that might be more typical, let's say, in a white collar situation, but not always. And then you have others who their deviant behavior, or they've done it or practiced it in so long that they've burned every possible bridge out there. And so they have no one to meet them or to return to. So those are the kind of people that are walking out the door, maybe with $25 or something and a gift card, and they don't have a place to stay, or they don't have family or friends, or they don't have these other kind of contacts. And so for them, they're basically on the fast track to being the homeless person that's going to be on the street someplace. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so and that's why there's such a range of possible interventions that the church could participate in.
And is there? You said it's this spectrum. Is there I don't really have options? Is that the more common one, or and I don't have a support infrastructure, or is that the more extreme one?
Well, that's not the more extreme, because again, the issues start compounding. So let's say, for instance, that your family that you would normally return to are in housing, public housing or subsidized housing of some type. Well, by law, they may not be able to have somebody that's a convicted criminal living there. So they can't return to the family like where they started from. Now they got to go someplace else. And where's the someplace else? And so if you're walking out the door, you don't have, even if you could find an apartment, you don't have first and last and security and all that. And then the Boston housing, whether it's an apartment or whatever, is so expensive for anybody. So where in the world are you going to get money to even start to make the kind of monthly payments that you need for rent? So now maybe you have to look someplace quite far from Boston or whatever. And if you're out there, then who do you know? How do you get back? Where do you get a job? All the problems start compounding upon itself. So that just starts to talk about where the church has opportunity to be helpful to people. Because the issue is, you go from, if incarcerated, right? So if you're incarcerated, one day all your meals are provided, you have a roof over your head, and all these other kinds of things are provided. You walk out the front door, and it might be none of those things are provided. So you've just went from 100 to 0 overnight. And how do you go from that to finding a place to stay, to getting a job, et cetera, et cetera? And those become the challenges.
And what happens? I kind of know. I think I know the answers. What happens if I don't figure that stuff out? Right. So my family can't take me back either because I've alienated them, or they're in Section 8 housing and they're not willing to take that risk, and I don't have the job. What happens to me?
Well, so the path of least resistance is to go back to the life you lived before, because at least there, maybe, and again, that's not everybody, but maybe you know how to make a few bucks, in some kind of hustle, legal or otherwise, and that becomes the default. And if you go back to that lifestyle, then it's only a matter of time before you get reconvicted and you return. But you're sort of I don't want to say pushing somebody in a corner, but you're really directing him to that path, or the currents, the winds and the currents are like moving you along in that direction. And that's why it's important to be able to have some sort of access to community that can be a countervailing to that.
And I'm just remembering, I wrote a paper in college about 85 years ago on something to do with this. I don't even know what the topic was, but the recidivism rates then, meaning when people, they end up back in prison within about a 6-month window, was as high as 60%. Is that still true today, or is that close to accurate, do you think?
It is high. So it's the percentage over what period of time. So they'll usually look at it within the first couple of years, for example. So it's very high. It's very high. And I even just heard Monday night that the cost is a little over $100,000 a year. So you think, geez,
to house someone in prison, you mean?
Yeah. So then you think to yourself, well, geez, we could probably house somebody less expensive than that on the outside and provide them some services, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, not in Boston, you can't.
Right. So one of the real questions is does the Department of Corrections, or going back to the issue of justice, do we have any responsibility in terms of continuity of care after release? So in other words, a person, maybe if they're released earlier, or probation, parole, or whatever, there might be some still obligations where they have supervised thing for some period of time indefinitely. But should the Department of Corrections have some responsibility for helping this person after they leave the door of the system? So it's just like they partner lots of people, whether it's ATF or FBI, whatever, on the front end, getting them into the system. Should they have equal partnerships to help people after they leave the system? So just to help to make the transition.
And I'm guessing, and I don't know if your research is touching in this area, so feel free to opt out of it, but I'm guessing there are some folks coming out who are going to wind up back no matter what you do for them. But there's those folks, call them on the bubble or what have you, that if you're able to provide the right support and infrastructure, they've got a decent shot at not going back. Is that a fair way to think about it?
It is, but what the chaplains will say is that you can't prejudge. There's people who are making it they never thought were that type of person. And so the real issue is making sure that people have that opportunity.
Okay, because we can't identify up front. There's not indicators of A, B, and C. This guy does it. A, B, D, E, F. This guy's not going to, or this woman.
Right.
And so as you're digging into, can you share a little about the approach you're taking with your research as you dig into this, and what you're?
Well, sure. So one of the things we did is we were just determined that there had to be a list of organizations or agencies out there. And so I looked at everybody that was registered as a nonprofit or with the Secretary of State, and looking at the big foundations and who are they funding. And so if I'm slipping over a little bit into the findings, if that's okay, one of the things was to realize that there's just so the biggest directory is probably the Coming Home directory. And then what happened there is when we found Christian groups in particular that weren't in the directory, we built a database to be able to add their names to it. But it gave us some insight that there was lots of Christian organizations or people that weren't part of it. But it's highly fragmented. And what you would find is, let's say you're a pastor of a church, and I don't know, could be 200 people, 400 people, whatever, and you might have a person or two in your church that's doing prison ministry for one reason or another. So the church might not say we have a ministry because you just got two individuals in the congregation who are doing this. But on the flip side, it almost looks like you have a ministry because you do have a couple people from the church doing this. And so part of the issue is you have so many one-off, two-off people like that, and they're doing real good work or whatever, and they might be doing it because they know somebody who was incarcerated, they were formerly incarcerated, any kind of maybe it's a family member, etc. And so they're maybe they already work in the criminal justice system in some place, and so they see the real need, so they want to do it and they want to volunteer their time that way. So you would see it was fragmented from that because there was so many of these people doing this. That's one. You would see it fragmented because you would see, let's say, people from the Black church doing it, maybe even the pastor or chaplain or whatever, and they would not know anybody in the white church that was doing it. And I would be like, how are you guys not bumping into each other when you're going into the same facilities? And so let's say that group might not know the conservative white group, which might not know the liberal right group. And then all those Protestants wouldn't know any of the Catholics that were doing it. So it would be like, you guys are all like, feel called to this kind of ministry, but you don't even know each other, because of how they do it or what they do or whatever, working in silos, etc. So that began to understand about some of the potential needs that you could do. So if I had another entity, let's say, perhaps I could help out with volunteers or vetting and training for the quote unquote organization of one or two that belongs to your church, and says, oh, you guys there's two of you and you're looking for some volunteers to do something, we could potentially help find some more volunteers to help you. Or issues on donations, when you have somebody who says, look, I'm getting rid of my old bedroom set or dining room set or whatever, and I'd like to go someplace maybe different than the Salvation Army or whatever. And there might be somebody who's a returning citizen who just got a place to stay in, but it's obviously completely empty, who could use that kind of stuff. So there's this whole thing about saying, geez, there seems to be like a need for an entity to help do the matchmaking and all these other kinds of services that all these sort of fragmented groups couldn't do on a one-off basis. And so far, that's one of the things that we've noticed, that that seems to be a need in the area.
And you mentioning furniture is reminding me, and I wish I could think of the ministry that does it. I don't even think it's in New England, but there's a guy who just collects furniture in a warehouse so that when somebody gets out of prison, right, even to the extent now they've solved the housing piece of the problem, they probably don't have any furniture.
That's correct.
Right. And so now you need furniture to give them. And so he brings furniture. And I wish I could remember where that is, but I'm guessing I may not have a wardrobe, work clothes, winter clothes.
Yeah. So like I said, you might leave somebody who literally just has a $25 gift card in their thing. So they might not have a social security number or social security card. They might not have a driver's license or mass ID. So literally you're like starting from scratch. So I think more of the theory or the work now is how much before release can we get a lot of this blocking and tackling done?
Because just to be clear, when I leave prison, they're giving me a $25 gift card. I got nothing else.
That could be your situation.
Okay. And so,
so go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say I can think of like medical needs being an issue, dental needs being an issue, medicine.
That is all correct.
And so all this fragmented groups you found, are they hitting on all the different things that are needed and they're just not coordinating, or are there big gaps in what's needed?
No, yeah, so there's gaps more likely. So it's not usually an issue that nobody's meeting the need. It may be the quality of the provider, the capacity of the provider. So if you have a little group, let's say, and you can service 10 people and you have 10 people, then you don't really have the capacity to do 12 people. That could be the issue. So anyway, there's lots of different issues. It's not uniform, but that is the kind of thing we're talking about.
And right, and I forget, Ed, if you told me this or not, but are there places where we can look at and say, well, Houston does this really well, and we can learn from them, or is really everybody, at least as best you've been able to find, is everybody pretty fragmented?
So some people, some cities are better than others because they might have a leadership foundation or something like that that can play that sort of coordinating, organizing role. So you might have a director of volunteers or volunteer coordinator that might just help mitigate between the people that want to the people that want to volunteer and help or donate, and those on the other side that need it.
Mm.
Right now, it's not obvious that anybody on the church side does that.
Okay. And so if you're thinking about it from what you know today, and I know you still have work that you're doing, but what are maybe three things or one thing or something you would say, hey, look, if the church would do X, it would materially impact the lives of people and recidivism in our society?
Yeah, so I think I think from what I've seen so far, there are definitely people in the church who want to volunteer, who want to help.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, where do I begin, or how do I do it, and how do I match up what I can do? And I don't mean match up like a skills thing. So like there's pen pal ministries, and somebody says, yeah, I can write a letter a week to an inmate. Like I don't have a problem with that, and I don't have to leave my home, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I read about a person who's like a healthcare proxy. They got the paperwork and they reviewed it and they helped make a decision. Versus somebody who wants to be a tutor or mentor, versus somebody who wants to go inside and work with people. So right now there is no central organizing list that says, and again, a lot of people want to do something after George Floyd, but like, where would they have gone? So let's say your church isn't one of the churches that has this ministry, or maybe it does have a ministry, but they're doing all stuff on inside and you want to do something on the outside. So right now, the biggest recommendation I can tell you is that if we had some kind of centralized entity that could play this role sort of across churches, liberal, conservative, black, white, that would benefit everybody. It would benefit all the members of all the churches, and it would benefit the inmates and stuff, either inside or returning citizens, because they would also potentially know where to go for some services if they weren't already directed by the institution that they're in.
Yeah. And so how are you thinking about timeline for when you're going to wrap up your research and maybe start to formalize things? Is it still kind of feeling your way through, or do you have some definitive thoughts?
So I'm going to try to wrap up the first report within the next month or so, and then we'll try to do a phase 2. And I think what we're going to try to do is, I think we're going to at least try to do some type of website. I think that what I'm viewing this is, we create a minimum viable product, which is a sort of online thing, and it has a certain kinds of functionality to it. Let's just email the people that we know who are already doing this work and just sort of keep them up to breast as to what's going on in terms of updates and opportunities and prayer needs and things like that. And then, get some feedback, and as it goes, let's say, iterate and try to develop a better version of that as we move along. But that's kind of how I see a phase 2.
You're making me think of in Connecticut, there's a human trafficking network, about 200 churches, and there's lots of volunteers in it. So similar model, and really just requires one person who's just part-time, but well, in theory, she's part-time. I don't think she really is, but who's just passionate about this and has a calling and conviction, this sort of thing. And they do amazing things, but it's that coordination part. you're talking about, because that's who everybody knows to go to. And she's got the network to say, okay, well, you need this, and I can put those two together and that kind of thing. It sounds almost like the same thing.
Yes. So what I would say is very much based on that model is what I think the answer is. And it's meant to be complementary, not competing. So let's say you're a Catholic chaplain and you're used to working with Catholic charities and a bunch of other groups. And, you may never need to go to this resource that we're just talking about, like this network example you're doing in Connecticut. Or it may be that your resources are tapped out or can't do it for one reason or another. And this would be a good alternative for you to go to. Mm-hmm. So the way I'm envisioning it is that as Christians of different types and stripes, we might not be able to worship together for theological reasons or whatever, but we might be able to work together because that shouldn't be a barrier if at the end of the day we're just trying to help people in need. And why wouldn't I, if I was a Catholic priest or deacon and I was trying to work with a Black pastor in the city, why couldn't I collaborate to help somebody or transfer, so maybe on the inside behind bars, he was being serviced by a Catholic chaplain, and on the outside, he ends up in a Black Baptist church someplace. Right. That's very likely, but why not have that cooperation?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, there's a lot, to your point, there's a lot we don't agree on in our world today, but how about we feed hungry people? How about that? Right? How about we help prisoners returning? How about that?
Okay. That seems to work for me.
Instead, I have a friend who always likes to say, there's nothing evangelicals like more than someone to disagree with, because then we can argue instead of telling anybody about Jesus.
I see. See, why do you have to you're going for all those things that really touch me? Like, okay, this is why that these are the painful truths that you're disclosing here.
Yeah. Well, they're never mine, because that would require actual insight. They're always borrowed from somebody. And so, Ed, if somebody's listening saying, I just feel convicted about what I'm hearing in this need, is there something they could do today that you would suggest for them to either plug in or learn more?
I would love to talk to them or have them contact me, and I can give them my email or whatever, because I can then direct them to any of the number of places that I've discovered as I've been doing this research, this project.
Okay, so if you are listening, my email is on our website, visionnewengland.org. Write to me, and I'll make sure it gets to Ed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ed, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for honchoing this project and for all your other work, because I know there's a lot of other things you do that we didn't talk about. So thank you for all of your work and ministry on behalf of the kingdom.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm maybe this is a sequel, and I get to come back to talk about the other things I'm doing.
I that'd be great. And the findings, right? Once you've got actual findings, maybe that's the kind of thing we say, okay, now it's formalized. Here's what we're planning to do. I'd love to do that if you can, for sure. All
right. And I'm going to come back and talk about spiritual formation and racial justice.
I would love that conversation. That's a big priority for us. So I'd love that conversation.
All right. So
and you and I need to talk offline about that too.
All right. So wherever Jessica is, it's on her now. She's director of communications. It's her fault.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Ed. Thanks, Jessica, for being our producer and making this episode happen. Thank you to our listeners. We pray this dialogue helps us, as A.J. Gordon would have said, be the people of God who do the work of God to transform our world. Visit us at visionnewengland.org for past episodes and resources, and click donate to partner with us to accelerate evangelism in New England. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church and impacting cities worldwide.